Become a patron on Patreon or use the YouTube join button for access to exclusive content and early access to videos.
YouTube content creator Cash Jordan has recently come under scrutiny for his extensive use of AI-generated thumbnails. Experts say that these thumbnails lead potential viewers to believe in events that never actually happened. A pattern of purposefully misleading videos in order to fearmonger about
So for the last year, the YouTuber Cash Jordan has been fearmongering about crime and immigration by using thumbnails that show events that never actually happened in real life. That's because he's taking advantage of the YouTube algorithm by using AI-generated photos of events that don't actually exist, which, alongside sensational titles, make it seem like it's pretty scary down here in the New York subway. In fact, he just reached 1 million YouTube subscribers using this exact strategy. Just look at the kind of views that he's getting on these videos. 1.8 million, 4.2 million. He's making a lot of money and getting a lot of views based off of these thumbnails, which show things that never even happened in real life and are totally fake. And the saddest part of this whole thing is that as long as YouTube keeps its recommendation algorithm mass recommending videos with AI-generated thumbnails, it's only gonna get easier for guys like this to spread their misinformation. That was unsettling. Anyway, I figured the best thing to do immediately after moving to New York City would be to pick a fight with a much bigger New York City YouTuber than me. Just kidding. I did not want to make this video. I really didn't want to make this video, guys. I didn't want to have to make the YouTube video. But he asked me to.
Would cracking down on fare evasion solve a lot of the subway's money problems? Is that the whole problem with the subway? It's improperly run. Let me know. Let me know.
Well, since you want me to let you know, Jordan, or would it be Cash? First name Cash, last name Jordan. Well, since you want me to let you know, Cash, here's my response to your questions. No. But before I elaborate further on that, Cash, I am going to fill everyone else in on who you are. So this is the earliest available video on Cash Jordan's channel. It's from February 2020.
You've heard people say that New York City apartments are small, but how small are we talking? Let's go find out. It has a lot of redeeming qualities, and the price is very, very affordable.
For the first 3 years of his channels, it's all house tours. I personally really enjoy seeing how his thumbnails have evolved over time. He had his crazy reaction face era, then he started getting farther away from the camera, the environment started getting featured a little bit more prominently. At some point, he figured out that adding a pop of yellow to the frame was his thing, and honestly, like, I think he got really good at thumbnails. Like, he was making better thumbnails than I ever had in the peak of his best work. But then something different happened. On August 25th, 2023, we get the first of what is now the newest iteration of Cash Jordan, which is the New York City is dying plus AI-generated thumbnail format. This is when Cash Jordan starts getting insane amounts of views with this strategy. The migrant crisis just hit NYC schools, ... Hey, what does that sign say? Vil poopy taub vil pilnity? Absolutely classic NYC migrant behavior depicted in this thumbnail. They are constantly going around protesting outside of empty school buses in the middle of the streets of Manhattan, ranting and raving about their Bill poopy taub vil pilnity. Oh wait, the events depicted in this thumbnail never actually happened because it is AI generated. It's honestly impressive how much of this sludge content Cash Jordan has been able to produce in the last year. But all of his videos are the same. The premise is always, insert hot button issue here is out of control in New York City, and our woke progressive leaders don't even care. And the two hot button issues that he almost exclusively focuses on are immigration and crime. So why am I, of all people, talking about this? Well, a lot of his content actually ends up touching on urbanist issues. I think that's how he ended up in my recommended so much. I remember the first video of his that I saw was called NYC is banning cars unless you pay $23 a day. And it was basically an anti-congestion pricing manifesto, of which he's made a few.
And if you think restaurants in New York are expensive now, just wait until all the food inside costs more money.
And if you think restaurants in New York are expensive now, just wait until the food inside costs more money. He made another video that touched on urbanism by being against red light cameras in a way that I thought was so insane. The title is NYC installs cameras ... to rob the poor. Can you believe that New York is trying to rob all of these poor, desperate drivers in Midtown Manhattan? I mean, you can't even blast through a red light anymore. Would somebody please think of this group of poor, marginalized, destitute drivers who will have their lives utterly financially ruined and destroyed by the weight of a $50 ticket? Like, Cash, this narrative is so patently ridiculous. I cannot believe you even tried with this one. And yet here are the comments, supportive as ever. So you can rob a store without any consequences, but if you do a traffic violation, they punish you? Cash deserves an award for his in-depth reporting and analysis. Hey, there's another guy calling him just Cash. First name Cash, last name Jordan. It's about controlling the population. How anyone still lives in NYC is a mystery to me. Well, it's pretty simple. All you have to do is not run red lights. Anyway, Cash, I watched your recent video, New Yorkers Just Stopped Paying for the Subway. And while I'll admit that it is not one of your crazier titles, and though it is a terrible thumbnail, it is not nearly as bad as usual, the content that you put in this video is crazy. Real quick, I have a caveat, which is that the video I'm about to critique is not even close to like the most damaging in terms of its message of the videos on Cash Jordan's channel. And the reason that I'm talking about this one specifically is because I have like an interest and a small degree of expertise in urbanism. If someone else who knows more and is more interested in the other things that he makes repugnant videos about would want to make a video calling those things out, it would probably be a really good YouTube video. I mean, I see the amount of absolute horseshit that is involved in the way that he talks about these urbanist issues. So I can only assume that the crazy things that he's saying about crime and immigration are equally as sensationalized and full of lies. So that's all. Bye. In this video, you argued that fare evaders should be arrested and serve time in jail. Seriously.
Still, though, you'd also stop fare evasion pretty quickly if the people who were caught jumping ended up spending time in jail. That would end the whole thing real quick, wouldn't it?
After all, fare evaders are part of a crime syndicate that costs the city $700 million a year. Is that okay? We just gonna let people be part of that group?
Cash, you piss me off because you're so good at saying your sentences with a tone and intonation that makes it sound like they mean something, even if the entire premise of your argument makes no sense. So I'm gonna fact check you. It's time to get fact checked, Cash.
Assaults and robberies down here still remain uncomfortably high, which is why ridership remains stubbornly low, with levels still lower than what they were back in 2019.
Subway ridership is only 65% of what it was back in 2019. That's 5 years ago.
First of all, that's wrong because the subway ridership as of the day that you put this video out was at 85%, not 65%.
But our population's not 35% lower than what it was 5 years ago, which means New Yorkers are avoiding the subway like the plague. And nobody who runs the subway is curious to figure out exactly why that's happening. But I'll tell you why it is. It's dangerous down here. And people don't want to risk their life every day when they're just trying to go to work and provide for their families. That's not a good idea.
So right off the bat, you are wrong about this. And I don't know why transit crime is like so inflated in our understanding of safety in the public realm. But as it turns out, evidence indicates that it's actually a little bit safer to be in the subway than it is to be in other parts of our public realm. So why we fixate on transit crime, I do not know. Regardless, you are correct that ridership hasn't reached pre-pandemic levels from 2019, but we also haven't done that nationally. We're nationally at about 68% of transit ridership based on the last report that we have. So New York, as it turns out, is actually doing decently well on this. There's only 15 transit agencies in the United States, by the way, that have recovered their ridership, and they are all orders of magnitude smaller than New York City. When you look at large metro areas, New York City is in 6th place, which is like not awesome, but also not the worst. We're at what? 85%. But if you look at the subway specifically, there's actually some evidence to show that for large metro systems in the United States, New York has had the fastest transit ridership recovery out of any of them, which is why it's so insane to make the jump from crimes in the subway are high to that's why ridership hasn't recovered from COVID, which is just stated as fact, but is patently false.
Because if the subway being dangerous and crime-ridden wasn't bad enough, as it stands now, the $2.90 fare needed to enter is very expensive for the horrible, unreliable service one will surely receive down here. Trains are late around 25% of the time on average, and delays are only increasing as this place goes unmaintained and just gets rustier and rustier on a daily basis.
So, Cash, these are your gripes and qualms with the subway system. You think it's too dangerous because of criminals. You think the fare is too expensive. You think the reliability of the trains is too low. You think that a lack of maintenance makes the train stations feel dirty. And you think that the subway isn't profitable for the city. Just taking note of these 5 points so that we can come back to them later on in this video. But let's get to the thesis of your video.
But the real reason this whole system is failing is so simple. Our tax-addicted progressive leaders can't seem to put their finger on it. The people riding it don't all pay to use it. And the losses from fare evasion add up to $700 million per year, which is only $300 million less than the $1 billion their congestion pricing scheme was supposed to provide, and is more than double the amount of their recent budget shortfall.
So let's start off with your claim that the whole system is failing, which is not true.
This whole system is failing.
The metric that you use is on-time performance, which, as it turns out, has actually gotten better recently. It was at a low of 58% in 2018, which was really bad. We're at 83% now. That's not reliable enough, but that is not even remotely close to a system-wide failure, and it's a massive improvement. So, there's lots of metrics that you can use to comprehensively evaluate the performance of a transit system, and some of them are getting better, some of them are getting worse. They're always in flux, but the system is failing and nobody is doing anything to stop it argument is just not true.
But the real reason this whole system is failing is so simple. Our tax-addicted progressive leaders can't seem to put their finger on it.
Okay, so I'm confused by your point that our
tax-addicted progressive leaders can't seem to
put their finger on the issue of fare evasion, because you've talked about the MTA's recent and pretty extensive efforts in terms of fare evasion multiple times in your video.
Except for these new evasion-resistant gates, they've got these new barriers to keep you from putting your hands on it and bracing yourself as you hop over, which is a big improvement. This entrance is pretty secure. Right through that door, you've got police and you've got National Guard, and our leaders know that weapons and violence in the subway is a huge problem. Progressive leaders can't seem to put their finger on it. The police catch so many people seem to put their finger on it, and our leaders know finger on it.
So you're just ignoring the fact that they actually have been putting a lot of effort into fare evasion and doing the exact things that you recommended, investing in new turnstiles in their new capital plan.
These new evasion-resistant gates, which is a big improvement.
And increasing the police presence at turnstiles.
This entrance is pretty secure. Right through that door, you've got police and you've got National Guard.
Like, they're doing what you're asking, bro.
The losses from fare evasion add up to $700 million.
Cash, you make it sound like this is a subway problem, when in reality, fare evasion is not exclusively confined to the subways. As it turns out, it's actually much less of a problem on the subway than it is on the bus. A much higher proportion of people don't pay their fares on the bus, and the actual amount of money that is lost to fare evasion on the bus is way greater. It's $285 million a year for the subway and $315 million for the bus. So why are we focusing so hard on the subway? Eliminating fare evasion in the subway would not generate $700 million in free money for the MTA.
The fix for the subway's money problems could happen tomorrow if we'd install more evasion-resistant gates and start arresting those who try to ride the trains for free. But as you're about to see, punishing criminals isn't a progressive solution to anything, especially crime. And that's why our leaders have decided to berate us into accepting highly controversial policies that are just going to make all of the problems down here worse.
Cash, I think you forgot that preventing fare evasion costs money. It really serves your narrative to claim that the only reason the MTA doesn't have police officers stationed outside of every single turnstile in the subway 24 hours a day is because our liberal leaders are too weak to punish the criminals. But you actually have to pay for those people to sit outside of those turnstiles. Did you know that the NYPD had a massive increase in overtime pay last year? An increase in overtime pay that was paid for by the state. the very same state that funds the MTA. NYPD got $4 million in 2022 for overtime pay, and they got $155 million in 2023 because of the program to put cops in the subways. That's an extra 39 times as much state funding for NYPD's overtime pay in 2022 because of police in the subways. So no, that's not free. And fare evasion totals being $285 million a year on the subway, and having spent $151 million on stationing cops for limited hours at limited entrances at limited stations, it's not hard to see that eventually you get to the point where preventing fare evasion costs more money than the fares that are being evaded.
With multiple entry points to the subway, you would need a lot of manpower and a lot of these machines, which cost a lot of money.
The MTA has to strike a balance when it comes to fare evasion. They have to be spending less than $2.90 per stolen fare in order for it to be worthwhile to them financially. So your narrative that congestion pricing is bad and we wouldn't need it if only our liberal leaders would grab the pile of free money that is evaded tolls and fares is just not rooted in reality. Like, we can have an argument about whether the MTA is balancing their investments into preventing fare evasion correctly, but it's not true that it's just free money that would pay for the benefits of congestion pricing if we didn't do congestion pricing. So stop lying.
You've got to understand that what we're talking about here, the real problem with the subway is that it's not a self-sustaining operation. And that's because the amount of money that the system brings in through fares is not enough to fix it and keep it operating. If this were a private business, it would have closed decades ago, but it's not. So they don't have to think like a private business. Which explains how they can lose $700 million a year across the subway, the bus, and the tolls and bridges, and still be here.
Cash, did you know that you are not the first person to think about this? Because there is a metric called the fare box recovery ratio that's been kept track of by every transit agency of all time ever, and it tracks exactly what you're talking about. And there are 0 rail-based transit systems in the United States that turn more of a profit than they spend. Why? Is it because we just forgot to think about it? Well, there's lots of benefits that you can provide with a public transit system that is focused on providing a good user experience as opposed to generating a profit. When you hand over public utilities to private companies, they consistently cut costs as much as possible in order to generate high profits, creating a worse user experience. We've seen this happen in industry after industry, and we've even seen it happen with privatizing transit. Secondly, the subway system generates massive amounts of wealth for the city and the state that does not come through toll revenues. That's because there's a huge number of business endeavors that would be completely impossible that depend on the subway. Just take the land value increases from being in proximity to a transit line. That alone is enough to offset the cost of fare evasion on the subway. And there's also sales taxes. There's also just the benefit of making people's lives easier. There's the benefit of saved time that's not put into sitting in traffic in a car. So, as you said, the city can't function without transit.
Because the subway is pivotal to life in New York, it can never close. It will always justify getting more money by the fact that it exists and that people use it.
It would actually cost the city and the state more to shut down the subway and not run it than to continue operating it. That is not by accident. That is the value that the subway creates just by existing. So that's why it's worth it for the state to continue to subsidize the subway at a loss, even though they don't make a profit off of it. And no, they should not run it more like a private business. While I agree in principle that it's a good idea to make sure that our transit is as self-sustaining as possible, the idea that we should be more business-minded with our MTA and try to generate profits as much as possible is super misguided.
But since the system operates this way, the only way to get more money is to pressure our elected officials into giving it to them. Which means higher taxes, new fees, congestion pricing maybe. But the problem is that like most of the money that comes from fees and taxes, when you give it to the agency that runs this place, they're just gonna waste it. And that perfectly explains how 10 years ago, the budget to run this place was about half what it is is today. Today it's 20 billion. It used to be around 13 billion.
Cash, I will only listen to your complaining about the MTA's $20 billion a year budget if I hear you first acknowledge these two things. First, the massive spending that we have to do in order to maintain the system today was caused by disinvestment from the subway by generations past, who deferred maintenance that would have been cheap at the time in order to divert that money towards auto-centric suburban sprawl. So we subsidized things that were not the subway. We let the subway deteriorate and get worse and worse, and now the cost of repairing it has gotten much larger than it would have been if we had just repaired it at the time. So that's why it's so expensive to continue running the subway, not because we aren't collecting enough fares. Secondly, if there's anything worth criticizing about the MTA's management of their finances, it's how they construct new projects in a way that is more expensive than literally any other city on planet Earth. So if you're going to be critical of the MTA, be critical of how expensive it is for them to build new transit because of inefficiencies in their budget, contracting, and construction process. There's a new video for you. You're welcome.
The only way to get more money is to pressure our elected officials into giving it to them.
Did you know that the construction of the original interstate highway system was funded with a 90% subsidy from the federal government? 90%? That is where the money went that would have gone to funding, subsidizing, and maintaining transit infrastructure in the United States that the people who planned the interstate highway system saw as obsolete.
When you give it to the agency that runs this place, they're just gonna waste it.
Why do we expect that it's normal to subsidize massive amounts of freeway and road infrastructure for suburban areas that cannot turn a profit and is massively unprofitable and unsustainable, and yet we expect that transit is supposed to turn a profit despite the public good that it provides and despite all of the massive tax revenue that it generates from its existence? It doesn't make any sense. The double standard is absolutely wild.
And that's why city officials are so hyped up about congestion pricing. It's an unavoidable tax on cars that are stuck on the road with license plates. They're going to use that money to offset losses from buses and subways where they can't seem to enforce the fares and get people to pay. But the real problem the people running the subway have is that their scheme to tax cars that drive on the road, well, even though the cameras are set up to do that, that plan has been paused.
So long story short, you think it's unfair to charge drivers for their negative impacts on the city and then use it to pay for a subway system that does not enforce fare effectively enough as you see it. So what is your proposed solution here, Cash Jordan?
The fix for the subway's money problems could happen tomorrow if we'd install more evasion-resistant gates and start arresting those who try to ride the trains for free. But as you're about to see, punishing criminals isn't a progressive solution to anything, especially crime. And that's why our leaders have decided to berate us into accepting highly controversial policies that are just going to make all of the problems down here worse.
So as always, the point of your video is to argue that progressive bad, cop good, New York City terrible. Which, by the way, you hate New York so much. I have never seen a bigger New York hater in my life than you, Cash Jordan. Now, I'm not going to argue that fare evasion is not a problem. It clearly is a problem. The MTA loses huge amounts of money on it every year. I will put an asterisk on the data that shows that fare evasion has been massively increasing in recent years, just because the MTA recently updated their methodology for surveying and then estimating the amount of fare evasion that happens on the subways. So while the increase in fare evasion is probably partially explained by an actual increase in fare evasion, it is also partially probably explained by better measurement of how much fare evasion was already happening that we were missing in our past statistics. But the thing is, Cash, you have all of these complaints about the subway, that it is too expensive, that it's too unreliable, that the stations feel dirty and unmaintained, that there's too much crime, and that the budget costs too much. All of those things actually require extra investment to mitigate, right? Like, those cost money. And on top of that, beating fare evasion also costs money. And that's why your argument is complete lunacy. Because first, the cost of just stationing officers in every subway station and bus in the city to enforce fare would be astronomically more expensive than the amount that they would actually gain from those fares, which you ignore in your video. But even if that weren't the case, what makes you so confident that the police are good at preventing fare evasion? I haven't seen the data to back it up. It doesn't seem like there's a lot of evidence to that.
With multiple entry points to the subway, you would need a lot of manpower.
In what world is the cost of performing and documenting an arrest, putting someone in a jail, giving them a sentence, sending them through the criminal justice system, potentially serving time, in what world could that possibly be more cost effective monetarily, or just in terms of the social cost of what that would do to human beings in New York and what it would do to our prison system? In what world are those costs less than the amount that the MTA loses to fare evasion? It's nonsense. That's why the MTA has to take a gradual approach to preventing fare evasion, with new gate designs that have been funded and plans in the capital program to replace the fare gates with the updated fare gates, and also the efforts that they've been doing to contract people to just stand at the gate and create social pressure to pay the fare, and also the changes that they've been making to the emergency exits where much of the fare evasion in the subway happens, and also changes on bus in order to enforce fares. These are all things that the MTA has been talking about, working on, and implementing like crazy over the past couple of years. And then in addition to that, they also have all of the cops in the subway. And it's not as simple as fare evasion is free money and the libs are too stupid to take it like you make it seem. So preventing fare evasion is probably not going to be a very effective way of paying for the massive costs of deferred maintenance that past generations of subway haters and road builders have left us to deal with now. But a really interesting way to make up for those losses is through congestion pricing. There's a bunch of reasons why congestion pricing is a good idea and would be a good thing, many of which you completely left out of your original congestion pricing video. But it's almost always really unpopular before implementation, and then once it is in place, it becomes more popular because people see the benefits that congestion pricing introduces. Better YouTubers than I have gone into the nitty-gritty of congestion pricing. This video is already way too long. I cannot get into the nitty-gritty of that right now, but as of today, Hochul unpaused congestion pricing. So we'll see if they can get it done before the incoming administration comes in and tries to completely implode it in January. So despite your very popular anti-congestion pricing content, it lives to see another day. By the way, it sucks to play MTA Defender. The MTA does so much indefensible shit. I absolutely hate playing for this team. But not having enough police in the subways, yeah, I don't really think you can be mad at the MTA for that right now.